The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is Doge. I think we're starting to get a flavor of what's going to happen there. There's a bunch of like teenagers running around like hacking into government systems with a presidential approval. We've seen a bit of a playbook with Elon and what he did at Twitter, now X, in terms of the approach. And it's very clear, he's actually sort of signaled in various ways that he's going to take the exact same approach to the United States government. I imagine we will see higher unemployment as a result of this. I don't know if that's how that's going to affect things. For startups, I also think we would expect to see less regulation and enforcement. So less regulation is sort of government policy, right, to remove some of that. But even laws and regulations that exist, if you're going to gut the government, I would imagine you're going to see less enforcement. And, look no further than Twitter's moderation when Elon came in, right? So there were the changes in policy. We're going to do less moderation, but also
Yeah.
whatever moderation was supposed to still happen, because there was no one working there anymore, the enforcement went away. And so I think we're going to see the same thing in the US government, right? I think it's going to be fascinating. I imagine like the IRS is going to be less able to collect taxes, which is a massive own goal, but also just, regulations around crypto both becoming weaker and those that remain being less enforced. I think it means there's going to be a lot of crazy volatility. It's going to be great for a lot of startups, both legitimate ones and judgy, scammy ones, because it's going to be kind of the Wild West out there.
And then what will happen is people get scammed and say, why isn't the government doing anything about this? Why aren't you
Right.
protecting
Like,
us?
regulations exist for a reason. Like the idea that regulation is a dirty word is insane, right?
I mean, there's a balance, everything in
Yeah.
balance, right? I feel like this pendulum right now is just can get a bit crazy. Like crypto's not going anywhere. Clearly, we need to figure out some sort of plan around it that allows for real companies to build and innovation to happen here in the US. But this idea of a free for all, again, how do you balance the innovation and the openness of the market to new players while also making sure people are protected? Like it's
Yeah.
not rocket science.
I went through the Twitter experience. It was a shitstorm. It was horrible. Elon was my direct manager for 2 weeks. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I think there's a lot of pain to be done if he wants to do what he did to Twitter to do the US government. He was going to take a lot of good initiatives together with the bad, and a lot of people are going to like suffer and suffer a lot. It's like when you don't have moderation, then people are toxic on Twitter. When you don't have a government service, people die, or people don't get the treatment that they need, or people don't get the justice that they deserve.
And by the way, that's already happening. It's already happening, right? So I've been somewhat following the shitstorm over at USAID, which is the foreign aid branch of the US government, which is effectively being shut down. And there are already hospitals and malaria clinics and stuff in developing countries that have just shut down. So I imagine the death toll from this is already non-zero and is only going to go up.
100%.
And, it's really awful to see.
And the person who is running all this has not been elected, right? He's been,
Yeah.
and he's not a member of any official government organization, and he has government contracts. So his fiduciary duty is not to the United States of America. So like, there's so much bad things that are happening here. The problem is that we need checks and balances, and right now we don't have the checks and balances. We have very little checks and balances. If you look at the valuation of Twitter, it's been demolished, right? They can't meet their targets with ads. They can't meet their user engagement. Everybody's complaining about toxicity. This is not the US we want. That's a very bad outcome for the US if it turns into Twitter after Elon.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that, because, I love to make use of your inside experience. Like, how might we expect things to unfold from here? We've had that first taste of what Doge is going to look like. How do you think that the government is going to be changed by this?
What I don't know is how much legal action could be taken to stop him. But let's say he's unchecked completely. He's going to do the same playbook. He's going to take office after office and cut 70 to 80% of the people in all the offices. And all the offices that are anywhere in helping globally or anything like USAID and anything like that will be cut 100%. So total separatism, deglobalization, and all in the pretense of making the government lean again. So a lot of things, a lot of fat is going to be cut off, but also a lot of vital organs. And that's okay when a company goes from $42 billion to $7 billion. But when a country it happens to that, that's not okay. Hopefully, my hope is that the regulator is going to wake up and there's going to be a few court orders and things are going to be blocked, like in the same way we saw last week with some of the birthright actions that were blocked by the
And the federal
court.
loans also, but like the injury and the what happens in the interim when these things happen, that causes major chaos. This isn't leadership. I know we don't want to get into politics, but like when you're dealing with a company of X size and then a country with global implications, it's a different thing. Like there should be
Yep.
classes on this from like company to country.
They're not the same thing.
They're not the same thing. No.
But a huge number of people don't seem to realize that. And, there's a sentiment that you see a lot on social media. It's like what the government needs is successful entrepreneurs who know how to get things done. And it's like, it's a different skill set and it's a different mindset. So
That's why they call it public service. A lot of these people actually don't, in the future as they grow and become more famous, book deals, this, that, like Obama, but like they go into it as a public service because a lot of it is thinking not just about yourself and the money you're going to make. And it's not like all of them are so pure and innocent, let's be clear, but you need to be thinking about public service and public policy differently. That's why they're different approaches in school. I do think there's a sense of understanding innovation and business this day and age, as well as these companies and revolutions that are happening and movements that are happening, how you implement that into a country, which is why, understanding AI, understanding tech and all that is so important. Social media, where this is heading. But
let me take the other side of this, the devil's advocate position, as it were. Like there are a lot of people, some of whom might be still listeners to this podcast, or they may have unsubscribed and discussed by now, who are like, Elon is a genius, and not only is he a genius, but what he did at Twitter was a genius. And there were all these predictions that when he cut 80% of the workforce, that it would stop working, that, the whole system would collapse irretrievably. And they point to X.com and say, hey, look, it's still running. People still use it. So that just proves that he did an incredible job. And he's going to do the same thing with the US government. So what do we say to that?
I say that systems like Twitter are built to be up without human involvement. If you take most services, if you cut 70% of Google, if you cut 70% of Facebook, if you cut 70% of all your favorite services, they will still be maintained. The question is, what do you lose? You lose your future. You lose the ability for accountability. You lose the ability to work with compliance. Like Twitter is definitely not compliant with the US law or European law, right? So they're just ignoring it, and it's okay from them. It's okay. So I think you lose a lot when you fire a lot of people. Every company has fat, and when I said the U.S. government for sure has some fat, the problem is not doing it. The problem is how do you do it? Taking some time to think before you act is probably the advice thing when you're treating a country rather than a company that you own. Because you don't own the US. If you're Elon, when he did it for Twitter, the worst case could have done that a company that he owns would go bankrupt. He doesn't own the US. The US people own the US. So he needs to think a little bit before he acts like he owns the country.
No one's debating that he's not brilliant and hasn't created amazing things, right? I think that we need to separate those two, is that someone like him giving his insights on things could be interesting as an entrepreneur from the industries he's impacted, being on an advisory group, but the level of how he is putting his fingers in, you know what I mean? And in the trenches at this level is starting to become, I think, just out of control and almost inappropriate.
I think he's been an incredibly decisive CEO of many companies, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, that's sometimes good, sometimes bad, depends on the quality of decision making. But he's been very decisive. Now, you know what you call a very decisive CEO when they're running a country? You call that a dictator, right? That is not how you run countries. And I think that is, one of the big mindset shifts that I was referring to, going from private enterprise to government, is that private companies do not need to be democracies, right? They are optimized for efficiency. They can be dictatorships. No one is there against their will. And so I'm very comfortable saying, a private company, especially one with a single owner, is their plaything. They should comply with the laws, but they can do what they like, right? They can run the thing into the ground. That's their problem. You can't do that to a country. And it's so dangerous. And that's why putting a lot of these tech bros in to run the country looks a lot like fascism, because a well-run company is kind of fascist, but that's okay because it's a company and not a country.
Yeah. And also, I feel like we forget just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. A lot of times it's like, oh, why don't we do that? All right, we can do all, but should we? And also, like, let's think about the domino effect of this action. I feel like there's no sense of the domino effect. It's just like we're so thinking like tunnel vision right now, and it's irresponsible. That's personally how I feel.
It's definitely an experiment in humanity that I didn't opt in for. So
Exactly.